Welcome to the Claire and Horatio Daily World Brief, available at claireandhoratio.com. Today is Friday, June 26, 2026. And, well, we have to start right away with what happened earlier today. The U.S. military conducted direct strikes on Iranian targets.
Yeah, it's a rapidly developing situation. Central Command struck Iranian missile, drone, and coastal radar facilities. This was a really rapid retaliation.
Right, for the drone attack on Thursday.
Exactly. A one-way drone hit the Singapore-flagged cargo ship Ever Lovely right in the Strait of Hormuz. And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is already broadcasting threats of a much wider response, actively blaming the U.S. and Israel for violating maritime boundaries.
And, the immediate casualty here, aside from the physical targets, is that 14-point Memorandum of Understanding, the truce they just signed over a week ago on June 17.
Yeah, that truce is effectively shattered now.
Yeah.
And it was carrying immense geopolitical weight.
Right, the stakes were huge.
Completely defining the regional strategy. It established 60-day U.S. sanctions waivers on oil and shipping,
Which allowed Iran to legally export crude on the open market rather than, relying on that illicit shadow fleet of aging tankers going to China.
Exactly. And the agreement also created a structured path for Tehran to access roughly $100 billion in frozen assets scattered across foreign banks. Beyond that, there was a highly conditional proposal for a $300 billion private reconstruction fund backed by Gulf states, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE.
So, okay, let's examine the internal logic here, because this is where the policy friction gets really apparent. Iran's economy is suffering what? Near 50% inflation right now?
Yeah, hovering right around there.
And they had a 10% economic contraction just from the regional conflict back in February. So why would the leadership in Tehran jeopardize a $300 billion lifeline and immediate legal oil revenue, all over striking a single commercial cargo ship?
Well, because geopolitical maneuvers frequently prioritize military leverage over immediate domestic stability. For the Iranian regime, demonstrating physical control over the Strait of Hormuz it's essential to maintaining their regional threat posture.
They need to show they can choke off the supply.
Right. They view the capability to throttle global shipping as their primary deterrent. And the public consequences of that strategy translate directly into household realities worldwide.
Yeah, which is why the U.S. wanted the MOU in the first place.
Exactly. The administration pursued it primarily to lower the price of petrol at the pump, which is obviously a massive domestic vulnerability for them. When you have 36 million barrels of oil sitting in tankers waiting to transit a militarized choke point, any disruption instantly spikes global energy costs.
Right, and that filters down into transportation costs, groceries, just broad inflation across the board.
Everything gets more expensive.
But these regional conflicts also ripple instantly into the digital infrastructure you rely on daily. Because, during the broader U.S.-Israel-Iran war in February 2026, the UAE's massive AI data centers were explicitly targeted.
Yeah, facilities run by major U.S. tech firms like Amazon and Microsoft, they were targeted by thousands of Iranian drones and missiles.
Which is wild.
Right.
But the UAE is pressing forward regardless, right?
They are. They're developing Stargate UAE, which is an AI computing cluster, roughly the physical size of Monaco, designed for OpenAI and other developers.
Wow, the size of Monaco.
Yeah, but their vulnerability remains really acute, because beyond direct kinetic strikes, their digital ambitions rely heavily on physical logistics, undersea cables, massive hardware deliveries.
And that hardware has to get through the Strait of Hormuz.
Precisely. The current blockade there has severely delayed the shipment of essential processors and server racks. It's a striking reminder that, despite the abstract nature of the cloud and AI, physical geography and maritime choke points still completely dictate its future.
That tension between physical choke points and sovereign control brings us to another area where boundaries are being fundamentally tested, and that's legal jurisdictions.
Right, we're seeing this play out in courtrooms globally.
Yeah. In the UK, the justice system is grappling with a deeply unsettling case. British academic Sarah Steele was strangled in Cambridge in late 2023 by an off-duty U.S. fighter pilot named Jacob Wolfson.
And under normal circumstances, UK law enforcement holds primary jurisdiction over violent crimes committed off-base.
But they didn't here. Local constabularies ceded jurisdiction entirely. So Wolfson was tried at RAF Lakenheath by an all-male U.S. Air Force panel. He was convicted of strangulation and sentenced to just 6 months in a corrections facility.
6 months. And the civic stakes of hosting foreign forces become so stark when you examine these insulated pockets of American jurisdiction operating on British soil.
Which is usually governed by a status of forces agreement, right?
Yeah, exactly, a SOFA. But the application here is drawing intense scrutiny. Steele's critique highlights that the military justice system fundamentally prioritizes the operational military mission over delivering justice for British civilians.
Because if he had faced a British civilian judge,
Legal scholars note he likely would have faced a trial for severe assault or manslaughter with a significantly harsher sentence. Instead, the system forces civilian victims to navigate this really insular, aggressive military court structure.
it's devastating. And speaking of accountability mechanisms, in Pakistan, they are being deployed to silence dissent entirely. An anti-terrorism court just sentenced 33-year-old Balak activist Marang Balak to life in prison.
Yeah, prosecutors successfully alleged she incited a crowd during a July 2044 protest in Gwadar, which resulted in the death of a paramilitary soldier.
But she's a medical doctor, right? She evolved into a nonviolent human rights campaigner after her father was forcibly disappeared by the state in 2009. We have to ask, what happens to a civil society when peaceful advocacy is legally prosecuted using the exact same framework designed for armed extremism?
Well, it generates a severe chilling effect that historically just backfires on the central state.
Mm.
Balochistan is a paradox. It's rich in natural gas and minerals, yet structurally impoverished. And the ethnic Balak minority has long cited systemic discrimination by Islamabad.
So by locking her up.
By prosecuting the leaders of nonviolent movements, the government actively dismantles the belief that civil grievances can be resolved through democratic engagement. Security analysts are warning this tactic risks pushing marginalized communities directly into the arms of active separatist insurgencies.
Like the Balochistan Liberation Army.
Exactly. It essentially eliminates the middle ground between peaceful protest and militancy.
Right. And accountability is being tested in two other distinct global arenas today. In South Africa, Vusimusi Kat Matlala pleaded guilty in a $22 million police tender fraud case. He agreed to an 8-year sentence in exchange for testifying against high-ranking police officials, including the current national police chief.
Which is a massive development there.
Huge. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, a former high-ranking intelligence official, Colonel Dmytro Kozura, was just sentenced to life in prison. He operated a safe house to feed state secrets and classified troop movements directly to Russia's FSB.
A betrayal dating back to 2018.
Yeah. Oh, and just a quick reminder for those tracking these global shifts, for more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarinhoratio.com.
So moving from those global courtrooms over to the U.S. administrative state, the mechanisms of detention are facing some intense scrutiny right now.
Yeah, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, is formally demanding an independent investigation into rising mortality rates within U.S. immigration and customs enforcement custody.
Right. Human Rights Watch is reporting 52 deaths in the first 500 days of the second Trump administration. They're calculating this as the highest mortality rate in over a decade. Turk also expressed severe alarm over the systemic excessive use of solitary confinement within these facilities.
The Department of Homeland Security's internal watchdog is concurrently launching an investigation into these specific deaths, and the surrounding systemic factors. But ATF officially denies any spike in mortality.
Yeah, their stance is that they have a 0.009% death rate. They state they maintain higher medical standards of care than most state prisons holding U.S. citizens, all while rapidly expanding bed space to fulfill the administration's mass deportation pledges.
Executive branch accountability also surfaced in federal court today. Former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton pleaded guilty to a single charge of mishandling classified documents regarding his memoir.
He admitted to retaining physical diary entries containing top-secret national defense information.
Right, and he faces up to 5 years in prison, a $2.25 million fine, and he'll face formal sentencing on October 28th. But I want to pivot to the Supreme Court because a 7-2 ruling on Thursday delivered a sweeping victory to the German agrochemical giant Bayer.
Thrown-up case.
Yeah, the court ruled that individual states cannot force Bayer to put cancer warnings on its Roundup weed killer because federal Environmental Protection Agency regulations, which do not require the warning, take priority.
So federal standards supersede state laws here.
Exactly. Let's unpack how this federalism works in practice. It's basically like a local town trying to enforce a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit on a federally owned interstate highway. The Supreme Court just ruled that the federal government holds the radar gun, and local municipalities cannot write their own distinct traffic laws for that road.
That's a great way to frame it. And the ruling specifically blocks failure to warn claims under state law. That neutralizes a primary legal strategy utilized by tens of thousands of plaintiffs who argue the product caused their illnesses.
Though Bayer still faces separate claims, right?
They do, regarding negligence and misleading marketing practices. But this decision drastically reduces their broader legal uncertainty and potential future financial liabilities.
Meanwhile, local governance decisions are carrying immediate human impacts in New York. The city's Rent Guidelines Board voted 7-1 on Thursday to freeze rents for about 1 million regulated apartments starting in October 2026.
Delivering on a major campaign pledge by Mayor Zoran Mamdani.
Right, who systematically overhauled the board's membership to achieve this specific outcome. But landlord representatives, including one who publicly resigned just prior to the vote, are warning the freeze fundamentally disregards spiking insurance and maintenance costs. They argue it's going to accelerate the physical deterioration of the city's aging housing stock.
You know, that friction between federal or overarching standards and local realities in the U.S., it really mirrors Europe's current struggle to unify its own structural standards, specifically regarding defense procurement.
Because European NATO members spent a collective $559 billion on defense last year, with Germany alone accounting for $114 billion.
Right. And German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is hosting the E5 NATO leaders Macron, Starmer, Meloni, and Tusk in Berlin this week, precisely because that massive capital injection is deeply fragmented and inefficient.
Europe's defense manufacturing is basically paralyzed by national protectionism. Look at the recent collapse of the Franco-German Future Combat Air System, or FCAS, fighter jet project. It perfectly illustrates this failure.
Yeah, disagreements between France's Dassault Aviation and Germany's Airbus Defense and Space over who would control the intellectual property and, act as the prime contractor. It completely derailed a critical next-generation air power initiative.
So the institutional bottleneck is entirely structural.
Exactly. Relying on large domestic manufacturers from every participating nation creates massive duplication of effort and endless logistical delays. Security analysts argue Europe must rapidly shift toward minilateral procurement.
Minilateral. So instead of trying to coordinate 27 nations.
Right. 3 or 4 like-minded countries must jointly develop weapons systems. It is the only way to achieve the scale and speed necessary to counter current geopolitical threats.
But Chancellor Merz is trying to navigate this international pressure while managing severe compounding domestic strains at home. Germany just reported its highest corporate bankruptcy rate since 2013, up 7.8% in the first half of 2026.
And public infrastructure is fracturing.
Yeah, Deutsche Bahn is suffering nationwide digital radio failures, causing mass train cancellations. Without those active communication systems, physical safety protocols force the trains to halt entirely.
And simultaneously, Merz is attempting to push through the full implementation of a highly contentious 33-point pension reform package. That includes gradually raising the retirement age to over 67 to stabilize an aging, shrinking workforce.
The economic philosophy driving these constrained national decisions is actually being directly challenged by economist Mariana Mazzucato in her new book, The Common Good Economy.
I saw this. She argues modern governments must stop acting merely as passive market fixers who only step in to correct failures after the fact.
Right. She asserts they need to lead with massive, objective-oriented public investments. She envisions a structural shift where funding local community soccer pitches or pursuing massive Apollo-style scientific missions is recognized as building the common good rather than being dismissed as an administrative budgetary expense.
But true governmental responsibility requires a long institutional memory, too. This month, Germany's EVZ Foundation marks 25 years since it began paying roughly $5.1 billion to compensate 1.66 million Nazi forced laborers.
The original fund, which was established in 2000, was split equally between the federal government and thousands of German companies who profited from that horrific labor.
Right. And the tragedy of geopolitics is heavily embedded in the mechanics of that history. Because the Cold War delayed those financial payments for 50 years, as West Germany flatly refused to send money behind the Iron Curtain.
Leaving millions of victims without acknowledgement or support for decades.
Exactly. And today, that same foundation, which evolved to fund democratic and human rights projects, is officially banned by the Kremlin as an undesirable organization because of its support for Russian and Belarusian exiles and its solidarity with Ukraine.
It's so cyclical. But Mazzucato's concept of the shared common good brings us to the natural environment, which is currently delivering severe, undeniable physical warnings. Europe is baking under an unprecedented and deadly June heat wave. Germany hit a provisional record of 41.3 degrees Celsius on Friday in Saarbrücken.
And stripping away the meteorological jargon, this extreme heat translates directly into systemic infrastructure failure. Hospitals in the Paris region are saturated with heat stroke victims, triggering strict emergency triage protocols.
A Eurostar train broke down, trapping 400 people east of Brussels without climate control.
A Swiss glacier research team warns that critical winter water reserves will run out months early. And the Besnau nuclear power plant in Switzerland even had to take both reactors off the grid because the river R hit 25 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
Nuclear reactors require a temperature differential to safely dump waste heat. If the river water is too warm, you cannot cool the systems without boiling the river and devastating the local ecosystem.
There is a striking cognitive dissonance in how this physical reality is being handled politically, too. At a recent conservative conference in London, politicians openly criticized net zero policies and mocked climate initiatives while literally fanning themselves inside a sweltering, unair-conditioned room.
Yeah, squaring that ideological policy resistance with the physical reality of melting infrastructure and saturated hospitals seems increasingly impossible.
But a solution-oriented perspective is slowly emerging around next-generation geothermal energy, which is finding rare bipartisan consensus in the U.S. Companies like Quaise are pioneering millimeter wave drilling.
Right, so instead of using physical drill bits that grind rock and wear out, they use a gyrotron to beam high-frequency waves, similar to microwaves, to melt and vaporize hard basalt.
Which is incredible. This mechanism allows them to drill deeper than ever before, reaching super hot temperatures between 300 and 500 degrees Celsius anywhere on Earth.
While initial construction costs remain high, it potentially unlocks massive, always-on renewable baseload energy that just doesn't rely on weather conditions.
And our capacity to physically observe and understand the natural world is expanding rapidly in other areas too. A marine expedition off the coast of Brazil discovered 31 new species in the ocean's midwater in just 2 weeks.
31 in 2 weeks.
Yeah, they utilized a revolutionary spinning wheel confocal microscope called the squid. This allows researchers to observe the living 3D cellular structure of organisms live on the ship in real time, rather than preserving specimens and waiting weeks for lab processing on land.
The policy stakes regarding these discoveries, though, are immediate and contradictory. Because while scientists are uncovering the ocean's biological secrets, finding undocumented creatures like gossamer worms and giant rhizarians, the Trump administration has simultaneously unveiled plans to completely dismantle the $368 million Ocean Observatories Initiative.
Right, and that system utilizes a network of over 900 instruments to monitor ocean health, climate variability, and marine biodiversity. Dismantling it puts our ability to track these critical ecosystems and understand global climate shifts at severe risk.
It really does.
Well, to briefly transition from heavy global news, Netflix just released a new comedy called Little Brother, starring Eric Andre and John Cena. The premise involves Cena as an uptight realtor dealing with his chaotic former mentee.
Yeah, I saw this. The execution, sadly, strips away Andre's signature nightmarish weirdness.
It really does. It leaves this highly predictable, sanitized studio product that relies on panicked maximalism and volume rather than delivering any genuine comedic insight.
Yeah, it missed the mark. But, looking back at today, from the military choke points in the Strait of Hormuz to U.S. courtrooms to the deep waters off Brazil, today's stories demonstrate distinct global pressures pulling our institutions in vastly different directions.
They really do.
But they all ultimately ask the same fundamental question. When the foundational rules we've relied on, whether diplomatic treaties, legal jurisdictions, or literally the actual baseline temperature of the Earth, when they stop functioning as expected, who currently holds the power to write the new ones?
That is exactly what we need to be asking. Thank you for joining the conversation. We invite you to visit clarineratio.com for more daily world briefs and classic audiobooks.